Welcome to Tabletop Tommies. I'm Jonny,
And I'm Phil.
and in today's episode, which is a bit of a 2-year anniversary for us because our very first episode was about the Welsh Nationals, we're talking about the Welsh Nationals again. This will be our third time talking about the Welsh Nationals, and then we'll be dipping into the meta more generally, as it's a bit of a special episode. Maybe it's talking about what V3's been like since, what are we now, 8 months on since its release, Phil? Because it was September, wasn't it?
End of September, yeah. So seven and a half, 8 months,
Seven
yeah.
plus change, I guess.
Seven plus a couple of bank holidays, yeah.
We'll be sort of talking about what our thoughts are on the game, whether it started strong, whether it's heading in a good direction, whether we're a bit worried, that kind of stuff, basically. But I think we'll jump straight in with the Welsh Nationals chat. Now, we made big claims about what we thought the meta was gonna be, but before we talk about it, I think we should talk about what we took. So, what did you take, Phil?
So I took US and I conscientiously, deliberately chose to avoid any tanks. So I went for air observers, bazookas, and HMGs as basically my AT. So it's 19 dice. It was four six-man squads of SMGs in four scout cars, all of which had recce, two air observers, three bazookas with two jeeps, seven-man stubborn marine squad regular, and then three inexperienced platoon commanders on their own to make it legal.
The classic officer taxer.
Yeah.
You can change the version, but you can't change the man.
Yes. Yeah. So what I was aiming for was to see if can you take on armor with no dedicated armor yourself. Okay, you've got HMGs and armored scout cars. Obviously, I had to kind of balance it in the sense of I've got HMGs, I can shoot my own planes down. How was I going to manage that in terms of my scout cars being on the board when I called in the airstrike, where I placed the airstrike, and so on. And the actual real anti-tank was the three bazookas, two of which could go in a jeep and one could foot slog.
Are the M3s forward-facing pindles?
They are forward-facing, so
So that makes it a little bit easier.
Yeah. So they're not like the half track, which is 360. So it is actually with some clever placing and thought, both of your scout cars and also the entry point for the observer, you can have your own vehicles on the board and still not shoot down your plane if you roll the right dice.
Yeah, indeed.
Spoiler alert. And yourself, Jonny, what did you take?
I took the Finns for their final fond
Hurrah.
farewell.
Yeah.
I didn't know it was going to be when I wrote the list.
No, true.
It was a bit of I didn't really know what to take, and I'd been playing with Finns at Beachhead, and so I just sort of trimmed my Beachhead list down, and that was basically what I had. So I had two regular heavy mortars this time, not the complement of four.
Okay.
Um,
Very, very measured of you there, Jonny. Well done.
yes, what can I say? Nothing but reasonable.
Yeah.
Then we get into the span where basically I took four veteran engineers with flamethrowers, tough fighters, which is
Okay.
actually a really good combo, I think. On four comsomelettes for 19 points each.
Of course, yeah, the old points cost, yeah.
The final hurrah. I had an extra one, so I actually had five in total. But it didn't. It was just sort of like a universal transport. That one didn't have a dedicated squad for it. I'd bought as part of the rifle platoon because I had a sissy squad with 5 men to fighter, counterpart who can sneak up behind you, who were like SMGs, medics, all the rest of it. Three regular officers with a buddy with SMGs, which actually did a little bit of work and so were worth it, I think, because they're still getting the free ones. And then
Yeah.
four veteran anti-tank rifles.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so very similar to your beachhead list, but with two fewer more heavy mortars and something else to make it legal.
Exactly, yeah. Just I don't believe in tanks either, so
No.
I was also trying to avoid tanks. I don't like the single shot, sort of the binary nature of the tanks where you get your one shot, it misses, and now you're in trouble. And so I like to have either HMGs was my favorite in V2 Americans. Flamethrowers are always good because you can have a second squad coming up. The AT rifles didn't do as much for me this weekend as I was expecting, but
Okay.
having four of them really helps to hold people off, doesn't it?
Yeah, because even if you're just putting a pin on, it's still forcing an order check rather than just allowing people just to activate their armored vehicles without any pins.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest, he didn't do a lot of the sort of forcing failed order tests. Like I didn't really see many tanks fail order tests, but What it did do a lot of work on was sort of the recce vehicles and making them just run away. And so you've lost your turn effectively because you're scared of the anti-tank rifle.
Hmm.
And so I think it killed one armored transport, all
Okay.
four of them all weekend. But
Yeah.
they did do a lot of chasing recce vehicles away, which was actually really beneficial.
Interesting. Yeah, because I had recce on all four of my scout cards, and I can't really remember an occasion where I did recce. So that 40 points I could have invested in hindsight elsewhere. I was very much like, well, if you're going to shoot it, you're going to shoot it. Actually, given that most of the time the transports had guys inside, I was a bit like, I want to use them to get somewhere, and if I recce away, well then, my guys are 12 inches further away from where I need them to be. I'll take the risk, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, we had that conversation at the weekend, and I was on the same page as you that definitely wrecking on a transport is a bit of a waste.
Mhm.
The place where it frustrated me on the other side of the table when someone had wrecking on a transport was if I was using my mortars on a transport. And so it's such a tasty target when you've got an officer and a squad in a transport.
Yeah.
Only my spotter can see them. I'm now on a five, or maybe it's even a four if I've got really lucky so far. And then the moment you fire that mortar, it just whizzes away. So you've missed, but I suppose you forced the recce, which is
Hmm.
mildly annoying for the opponent if it's meant he's had to go somewhere he didn't want to go. But it was actually quite powerful at just stopping you being hit by a 3-inch template, basically.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, fair please.
Hmm.
Cool.
Before we jump into our games, I guess if we talk about the missions first, then that'll allow us to sort of race through the games because everyone will know exactly what we're talking about without us having to explain it in the heat of battle.
Yeah.
Um, Missions I thought generally were quite good. Um, I had a couple of qualms, but nothing massive. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I'd say four out of the five I thought were really good. I liked the third mission, which was a bit of a combination of two different victory conditions. I thought we had a nice balance in terms of victory conditions, deployment types, and so on. Um, yeah, so on the whole, no major concerns. Um,
I'm
do you want to
curious to
talk?
find out which one you didn't like. So I'll go through for the listener. I'll go through what missions we played,
Yeah,
and then I'll see if I can predict which one you didn't like. So the first one was kill point, seek and destroy, long table edges, meet and engagement, easy mission. Everyone knows it. Very nice. Had a secondary, which gives sort of the battle a focal point, which sometimes, if there's no secondary, sometimes you just end up playing a standoff.
yeah.
I thought it was good, and I think you probably liked that.
Yeah, yeah. I like the secondaries, and it was a nice, easy way to go into the event. Seek and destroy. Very little need to think, basically. So,
Yeah, and then we went into key positions.
yeah,
We mandatory five objectives, so none of the even objectives or like threes or sevens.
yeah,
Long edges, meet and engagement again. So quite an easy one. I imagine you enjoyed that one as well.
yeah. 100%. And the fact that it was predetermined that there would be an odd number of objectives got a massive thumbs up from me. Really not a fan of even number of objectives on key positions because it, it can end in a draw a lot more easily than having an odd number. And
Yeah.
five is a good number as well.
Yeah, I actually am liking the seven now. And I think when
Yes.
we talk about meta and we talk about
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
pushing people in certain builds,
Hmm.
perhaps the seven might come back up in that conversation. But I'll put that on the back burner till we talk about meta and army builds, etc.
Yeah, I know where you're going with this, and I was thinking about it earlier. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. The third one, they're coming out the walls. That was quite a lot of fun. It was so this one is a custom mission that Reese put in.
Yeah,
It's fog of war, so you can come on any table edge, hence the name.
yeah.
And he's mixed the victory conditions for meeting engagement and key positions. So you've got three objectives. So you get 3 victory points per objective and 1 victory point per unit killed.
Mm.
I enjoyed that. What did
Yeah,
you think?
I'm not a fan of fog of war deployment, but I really enjoyed this mission because it we've talked about it loads. There's more than one way of winning the game. You could focus on objectives, for example, but because it was fog of war, you were also just taking units off each other. Every turn units were dropping because of how you can come on in close proximity, shoot them, and off you go. I really enjoyed this mission. I thought it was really good.
Yeah, I had two thoughts with this one, which was that the secondary really helped because I was thinking about just stacking a corner of the table with like two objectives, and then I set up my whole army there. You can't come in behind them because they're touching the table edge, and I've got my whole force on these two objectives. Meanwhile, you're trying to hold one somewhere else, perhaps. Or if you're not, because I've decided to deploy there, I could I've got the advantage on the like the actual meet and engagement element. So that was my first one that actually, because the secondary was there, it encouraged players not to do that, to put the objectives more central so that you could also go for the secondary once you'd won the battle. And then the other part was the fog of war. I was expecting it to be a real pain in the bum,
Mhm.
but I ended up on an end table. And so we could walk around the U very easily. I don't know, were you in the middle of a column?
I think we were in last but one in, so we had a long way to walk around. So my opponent Jason was great at placing models for me and vice versa. So
Yeah, and I think that's what you need. Ultimately, it gets a bit fiddly if it's like a Stalingrad or something with lots of buildings, I imagine,
yeah,
where you can't. And they're saying, "Do you want me to place it here for you?" And it's like, "Well, I can't actually see where you
yeah.
placed that." But yeah, it was. I think Fog of War is actually underrated. I know a lot of people are hating on it, but I actually think it's all right.
Yeah, I think what I enjoyed about it was it wasn't just kill points fog of war. I don't enjoy kill points fog of war because it is basically just about appearing, behind an opponent, next to an opponent. Because in the
It's the
rule
daisy
book,
chain of death. Yeah,
yeah, it's today's chain of death. Because in the deployment type section of the rule book, it doesn't apply to the battle. That's the story scenarios, but it does apply to the battle scenarios. You can come on the same table edge as your opponent did last. So you don't have like in something like I think it's surrounded, isn't it? Whereby you can't come on the same edge as your opponent last did. That doesn't apply in a battle scenario. So if it's just kill points, it just becomes that daisy chain effect.
Mm.
Something we did, and I don't think it was necessarily we certainly didn't talk about it beforehand. I think I placed two of the objectives and Jason placed one. I put two basically in the middle, on the halfway line between the two long edges, but also not close to the to either flank to force the battle into the middle of the into the table because I was like, I can't be bothered to just play in a small corner. My unit comes on, shoots them. Your unit comes on, shoots that previous unit, and off we go.
Yeah, we did the same. I was going to put two of them on one side if I'd got the two
Yours.
of the three, but because I'm quite happy to come at you equally, as well as I'm happy to take the risk that I win the loaded side, but equally if I don't, I was planning to cross the table anyway, so that's no problem for me. But we ended up with the one in the middle because I didn't get to place the first one, so I ended up placing the third one in the vicinity anyway. Because I thought, well, I'm going to have to go and get one of them, and if not, he's just going to sit on them. And so I thought, if I'm going to have to get sort of like a bit of a maelstrom happening in the middle and hope. And then moving on to the next mission, I think is the one that I'm going to predict this is the one you didn't like, which was envelopment,
Mhm.
where it's asymmetrical victory conditions. So the attacker gets one victory point per unit killed, two for being in the enemy deployment zone, and three for being off
Off the
the
table.
opponent's table edge. And then the defender gets two victory points per unit killed.
Yeah.
Now, one amendment Reese made as we were literally just setting up, and it did change my decision,
Hmm.
was he called that, oh, your DZE isn't your DZE. We're playing just the long table edge. And I
Yeah.
felt that that also changed things quite a lot, like far more than you might expect, I think, based on sort of how quickly the call was made just before the battle started.
Yeah, because if you were playing the 12 inches on the side as part of the DZE, as the attacker, you've only got to go. If you can come on 12 inches from your table edge and exit 12 inches from your opponent's table edge, you've only got 24 inches to cover. So in two turns, wheeled vehicle, for example, or a tracked vehicle, with a single pivot, you can come on, pivot, and then go off the next turn. Yeah,
Yeah. And that's great with those recce transports.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and then because he called that, I unfortunately had the roll off and I chose Defender off the back of that because
yeah.
I just couldn't, like, because you're right, it took it from a 24-inch run to a 48-inch run. And I thought, nah, I haven't got the legs for that. But we'll talk more about that, I guess, once we talk about how the games went. And then
Yep,
finally was Land Grab, classic sectors, but obviously with the modern twist of you don't get to come on your whole long table edge with your
yep.
reserves anymore, just in your little quarter, which has changed the dynamic a lot more than I
Yes, it
thought it
has.
would, to be honest.
Yeah, because the previous tactic, because you were deploying across your long table edge, was to reserve, as much as you were comfortable with, and then you bring it on in the neutral quarter from your long table edge, and then rush into the enemy scoring quarter. Whereas now you've got to think about your angles, and actually holding stuff back may not be the answer because you've got a bit further to travel to get into your opponent's quarter in turns, 5, 6, and so on.
Yeah, it's a tricky one because the other problem is if you don't hold stuff back, you're very compressed in that little quarter. And
And you've
so,
got prep as well.
and you've got prep, and so it all gets a bit
Yeah.
and so I think the move is still to reserve. I think there's potential to go the long way from the short table edge, but it's very table dependent.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I did, but you're right. It was table dependent. I was able to basically just leapfrog behind terrain and then go in at the end. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess should we jump into our games then, Phil?
Yeah. I'll kick off. So game one, I have Michael Carrick of England WTC fame. So he'd been busy in Sheffield the weekend before. He basically had his WTC list, which was a Soviet list. Couple of units of scouts, couple of units of body armor engineers and comms omelettes, couple of regular squads with an LMG in each, a couple of Dacre Stewarts, and three, I think, AT rifles,
Hmm.
basically. So I won that. No, I didn't win that one. I drew that one. Sorry, Michael. I drew that one. That I basically shut down the Stewarts with the air observers, and he rushed me, which is how he likes to play. I couldn't shift the guys in body armor because they are so annoying to shift. So I ended up just chasing up. Once I'd taken out the two Stewarts, one with an air observer, the other was with a scout car firing HMG point blank from the rear. I then went chasing after his weaker units. There was one dice in it. I got the secondary. Really nice way to start. I play Michael all the time, so travel to Cardiff and end up playing guy that I play most weeks. But there we go.
Yeah. Well, it is the risk, isn't it? When you're a regular at the tournaments, you are likely to encounter other regulars fairly frequently.
Yeah. And yourself?
I had a tournament regular as well. I was playing Dan Moody, also of WTC fame. He was in Sheffield the weekend before. I think he was using Sally's list though, that she'd taken to WTC, and
He
he was a
was,
bit of
yeah.
a dab hand with it actually. In the list was a Stug, two BA-10s, sissies. One squad wasn't tough fighter, and then he had a sniper and some heavy mortars. Basically, that was the main thrust of it, with some Cagapatio as well, which was nice because it meant he could do the trick that I was going to do to him against me. We end up sort of fighting his quarter. The two highlights were is Stug managed to knock out an armored transport, needing a 6 to hit, and I was in hardcover, which was insane. So the squad all fell out, really sort of
Hmm.
like held up the attack. And then the other highlight was the final dice of turn 6 was his sissy squad that didn't have tough fighter, and he was two dice behind. And so he made the call to charge my squad on the secondary, which basically would have taken it from a loss without the secondary for him to a draw with the secondary. And so it was like an absolute no-brainer to do it.
Hmm.
But it was the sissy without tough fighter, and so my engineers with tough fighter just
Yeah. We're
wrapped
able
them
to
up
deal with it.
basically. Plus,
Hmm.
he got really unlucky with the Roland as well, so he was
Okay.
not tough fighter, and his Roland was unlucky, and so I got a win out of that. But it was very, like, it was far more touch and go than the result would imply. I think if you just looked at it on a sheet of paper.
Yeah.
But yeah, great game. Like the fact that it came down to the wire
Mm.
was brilliant. What about in key positions? Who do you have for that, Phil?
The key positions, I have Mike Parker, who was playing Finns. Phil Parker, his son, built his list, so it's Phil's fault. Everything that follows from now on. So Mike had three of the Armor 7 Vickers with the twin MG turrets, two Stugs, four, I think four infantry, like really, really bare bones infantry. We had Carcapaccio, and then I think three squads of maybe only 5 men, five men veterans of rifles, like really bare bones, and then a couple of mortars. So in terms of how the table laid out, and Mike basically ended up with two objectives about 7 inches from his table edge, and probably about one was about 30 odd inches in from the side, the other was maybe about 17, 18 inches from the other side. The problem was that second objective, there was a massive field, which meant that there's no way I can outflank onto that because we ruled it as rough ground, so my scout cars are not going to be able to go over that rough ground. So, so I was looking at it going, okay, well the kind of central objective I can probably, well, I can get to it on an outflank. I had a couple of objectives, maybe more towards the center line, and then there was one that was kind of in near a corner. So in terms of how it played out, I basically made an early push for the fifth one, the one that wasn't next to either Mike's line or my line, which drew drew a lot of his units towards that objective because I'd outflanked on the same side with two scout cars with guys inside. The idea being that if he doesn't get there quick enough, well then I'll bring on the scout cars and I'll just circle the wagons and hold out for on that objective. Mike did rush there quickly. I then tried to and succeeded with one of the two to bring on my scout cars on turn 5, right at the end of turn 5, and I ran the scout car all the way, so 24 inches all the way across the board at the back line basically. So I was within about 9 inches from that objective that was sitting on his back line, with the intention being that I would then advance up at the beginning of the next turn, pop out, shoot a mortar squad, and then just ride out the storm. Because I failed on one of the two scout cars coming in, I only had the one squad and scout car and an officer to do it rather than having 6 units to do it. So I think it was basically the penultimate dice of round 6, I had the objective. I'd got there, I'd cleared out, the mortar team. I was sat on the objective, and Mike was just putting everything in. So all of the MGs from the Vickers, both the Stugs and so on, and he managed to knock out the final man on the objective on the penultimate dice, which meant he could then run a unit onto the objective on the final dice. So Mike won it 3-2. But it was so close to being a 3-2 the other way. And a great game in terms of, okay, cheeky outflank, went for the bluff. Mike took the bluff, and then it was like, right, I'm going to run in behind you, waving at you as I go past in my scout cars. But yeah, if I'd got both the guys on turn 5, or both scout cars, might have been different. To be fair, Mike had Carcapaccio, so he was obviously holding them back, which did check me. It meant I couldn't bring my other units forward. I struggled in that game in terms of AT. So Mike shot one observer in turn 1, so I only had one observer left at that point. The first airstrike came in, and I managed to shoot my own plane away.
Well done.
Thank you. Yeah, Mike had no, he had 2 Pintles on the Stugs, but yeah, it was my scout car that didn't hold its nerve and shot away that plane. And then the second strike that came in, I rolled a 1. Mike repositioned the target onto my guys that was on that far objective, blew off the squad on that objective, and I was like, air observers are rubbish. Why do I bother taking them? A completely rational response in the moment from me.
A correct response, in my opinion. One thing we should have mentioned actually is that Reese doesn't like sticky objectives, so these weren't sticky. You had to be on them at the end, which is an important thing here because it means you've got to keep your infantry alive until the very end. It's not good enough to just sort of play tag and then run away.
Yeah, and I enjoyed that, to be honest. I enjoyed playing old key positions because of the, you think about where those things are. Are you going to outflank? Are you, obviously my list was very, very mobile with the 4 squads in the scout cars. So I did enjoy that.
Yeah, the touching as well. So it was 2-inch objectives touching them.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've found with the sticky 3 inches is it's just so easy to contest people because you have to capture at the end of your activation.
Yeah.
It's so difficult to clear all the chaff around someone's objective because they'll have like a Jeep behind the wall, or like the FAO who's already gone will just be crouching down behind the wall. And you've cleared the bulk of it, and you've got your 10 veterans there. But because they can only activate once per turn,
you can't clear the other.
It's going to take you 3 or 4 turns to kill all these one-man units. And then you're in the way of anyone behind you who wants to shoot them anyway. And so I agree that I actually am not that sure on sticky. I think they're a bit gamey, the sticky. In my key positions, I played another WTC player. So WTC all the way so far for me. I played Charlie Murphy, who was very keen to let us know he played for WTC as well, I believe.
I mean, I believe he was walking around all weekend with a hoodie on and had the dice and the pin
He had
markers
his full
and yeah,
P kit on, didn't he?
just in case we weren't sure. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Very
yeah.
impressive.
Congratulations, Murphy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he looked very good in it, to be fair. To his
he did.
credit, I understand why he was wearing it. He looked fabulous in his jumper there. Um, but we played on a table with a big old mansion in the middle, but it wasn't in the middle. It was in the middle off to one player's side. And then we had rivers flanking this mansion. It was, if it was your estate, I imagine you'd be very proud of it. Um, the problem is, though, it meant if you tried to outflank, you've got to cross the bridge realistically. And then he won the number of objectives. So he placed three and placed them around the mansion. So I kind of matched because I thought, well, I don't want them out on the flanks because then how am I going to hold the one on the flank and try and like fight his? So we played in like a classic star formation in the middle, effectively. But then he won the roll off and chose the side that didn't have the mansion in your way, which would have been lovely for me if he'd had his mansion in the way, because I would have flamed it either with a unit in or without and made it impassable. And he just would have had this big blockage in his way. But instead, I had the big blockage in my way. And then basically ran the transports up behind the mansion because he had a ton of tanks. So it was a German list. I think he had three Panzer threes, a Panzer two, I think, and then he had two 250/4 transports. So
Of
a lot
course.
of armor.
Hmm.
He's got a lot of stuff that can either pin or wreck a
Hmm.
Comsomolets. And so I actually ran all my transports behind the mansion like it was a car park. He went in ambush with all his tanks the next turn. And so the men just got out and tootled around the mansion, basically. Um, and then I killed most of his infantry, but not enough to stop him holding. He then parked his tank on the central objective once he dealt with my flamethrowers, which was a perfect way to
Great
nullify
move.
it.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, yeah.
And then this game also came down to the last throw of the dice because turn six, I rushed a transport up onto his objective, which had one man on it to contest it. So I was winning 2-1. All I had to do was pass the order test on a veteran. He did take a pin, so he took a second pin. He was on passing on an 8, and he rolled a foobar.
Ooh.
And so that ran away. I mean, it was a draw after all
Okay.
that. So that one went the other way, where that time I was rolling for the win and
Yeah.
got the draw. Whereas in the last game, the last dice was the other way around. So a great game. Like it was a really fun game. I like these games that come down to the very last pull of the
Mm.
dice and
Hmm.
it's not one-sided. But that mansion, man, it was just so frustrating having to walk around it. And then, especially when you know that at the moment you walk around the corner, there's not a lot of cover and you're basically walking into a storm.
Yes. Yeah, yeah. Or a barbecue in this case. Yeah. So round three, I played Jason. Jason had an Italian list. He had a couple of the M1340. Yeah, M1340. So it's the armor rate with all the DACA, but it's got vulnerable.
Mhm.
And he had the big battle bus as well. Great big Burst Aguilera squad. He had some guys on motorbikes, which I thought was awesome. I actually love that. Medium howitzer and then some mortars and so on. So I won that one. I kept I basically kept the scout cars off the board, bar one. Put all the yeah, a lot of the scout cars were empty. I basically just put a platoon commander in a scout car so that it wasn't fully empty, and deployed the squads. And basically just went after the objectives early doors in order to kind of secure them and force him to come to me. Yeah, so that was a win. The being vulnerable as an armor 8 in fog of war is quite funny when you drive up a scout car behind, which is +1 normally, +2 because you're point blank, +4 because it's in the rear, +5 because it's vulnerable. And it's like suddenly one HMG is actually pretty easy at taking out armor 8 tanks. But
Yeah.
that's really really nice game. Jason had no flak, so he did get. Yeah, I think 3 of the 4 airstrikes came in, so I was able to deal with the artillery and the mortars basically just by they were roughly 18 inches away as well. So you target one side of it, bring in the point 18 inches away, which happened to be where the mortars were, and then you've also then targeted the mortar and then just draw the other 18 inches back onto the artillery piece. So he was getting double hit on one occasion, and then the third one just finished off whatever was around the next turn.
Yeah. So that was your Air Observers Day in the Sun, basically, that game.
Yeah, they were great. Yeah, to be fair, they were very good against Carrick as well because they basically just nullified his Stuart. So 2 out of 3 games, Air Observers, I love them. I've got over my disappointment from game 2. It's all about Air Observers now. Off we go.
Yeah. And then in my version of the Coming Out the Walls, I played Carrick. So
Hey!
so if you want to know what was in his army, rewind a few minutes and you'll hear
Yeah.
Phil tell you all about it. As I said when we were discussing the missions, he got the 2, so he put them in the middle. So I put mine in the middle to match. So they were sort of like no, about 18 from the closest table edge, I'd say. I knew he had scouts and I
Hmm.
knew he was going to forward deploy them onto the objectives.
Of
And
course.
so I thought, what I'm going to do is let him show his hand. Now, in this mission, you have to reserve at least half,
Yeah.
but there's no maximum. And so I was very tempted to deploy nothing,
Hmm.
basically, just partly to see what it felt like to play a turn with nothing on the table. Um,
Sure, I imagine the answer is, but
yeah, but I genuinely thought about it because I thought if he brings all of his units on,
yeah.
like thinking, oh yes, I've seized the initiative here, that's perfect for me because then I know exactly where I want to bring my men in from. Um, but instead, what I did was I deployed my mortars and their spotters so that I could infiltrate the spotters just to keep them away from at least one of the objectives, which
Hmm.
worked, which was good, and it sort of meant he was clumped up in the middle. And then I basically played meet and engagement because while he was sort of like bringing stuff on from all sorts of sides and trying to sneak up behind us, I thought I'm just going to keep everything tight and together. So when his steward came on behind, I brought an AT rifle up behind that, the following turn. He scooted off on a recce, ran away into the middle of the table, but that was job done basically. And then I ended up with just this nice formation marching up the table. I got myself a little bit confused on this one because of the victory points for objectives and kill points. I was very
Hmm.
tired, and I was playing sort of turn 6, thinking I needed 2 objectives to win because he was sat on 2 originally, and I'd been doing the maths off that basis effectively. And then I realized he'd abandoned one of his objectives, and I was
Okay.
5 dice up anyway. So even if he had one more objective than me, I was still 2 dice up. And so
Yeah.
actually, I was fine, but it felt incredibly tense until the final moment. Even though actually it was kind of in the bag, even if he'd had more objectives, it probably would have been fine. I didn't deal with the stewards that game, really. They survived until the
Okay.
end. My flamers just ran out. They nicely dealt with the body armor and they nicely dealt with the scouts,
Okay.
but they were like satchel charges where basically the engineers got out through the satchel charge, which
Yeah.
blew up in the enemy's face. But then I didn't have a satchel charge anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, my experience at roll call was the flamethrowers were just missing or just running out of fuel, and you're spending 30 points for nothing. So it's good that they've done their job there, albeit the satchel charge one attempt at flaming, and then the job is done. Yeah.
Yeah, and the thing because they're attached to the veteran tough fighters,
Mm. They can still
using
do
them,
work, can't they?
yeah, using
Afterwards.
them
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
like a suicide bomb
Yeah.
isn't
Yeah.
a bad problem because you throw the charge, you're still a big problem for that the person has to deal with.
Yeah.
Now you're not that offensive anymore, but you're hard to shift. And
Yeah.
so actually, I do think the veterans with flamethrowers, as pricey as it is,
Hmm.
might be a better way to go. Whereas in V2, I was always playing regulars.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that was a win. Don't think I got the secondary in that one though, because he just had so much stuff in the middle, and so I just
Okay.
couldn't. I did have it at one point, but then he just kept throwing men. It was very Soviet. He just kept throwing men into the middle of the table.
He is a good old Soviet general, is Carrick, for that
Yeah.
reason. Yeah. So we
Um,
move into day 2.
Day two
So
begins.
round
Yeah,
4, yeah, I played Nick Murray of Wales WTC fame. So this is my second international of the weekend. You're already up to 3 at this point. I'm on
I'm
2.
already on 3. Yep.
Yeah. So we're playing envelopment. Nick run the roll off and chose to attack, which I, he said at the time, like, he may regret this. He didn't regret it. Spoiler alert. But he chose to attack. Nick was also playing Italians, and he had, I want to say, 8 or 9 armored vehicles.
Yep.
Um, Now, one of them is ridiculous. It's the inexperienced, what, LMG open top vulnerable command vehicle that's like 20 something points.
Not anymore. It has
Not
gone up now.
anymore. It has gone up now,
And
but
we
at
actually
the
shouted it out in our minor update episode. We shouted this up. We shouted this out because it got an HMG in the upgrades.
mm,
For 50 points now, it can have an HMG, which is a better call at regular. But yeah, in his list, 26 points is madness, isn't it?
yeah. So we had a couple of them. We had a couple of the Armor 8 M13 40s I mentioned earlier, and some other things with HMGs. So I was and the bus as well. So I was looking at it going, I can't chew through 8 or 9 armored vehicles at all in defense. Um, his infantry wise, he had a cavalry squad, he had a paratrooper squad. I want to say maybe only 2 more squads, maybe 5 or 6 men with an LMG. So bare bones infantry and just a ton of armored vehicles. So Nick won that one. The furthest forward his infantry got was his cavalry unit did try to get off the table, but it didn't. I forced it to recce away and so on. Everything else basically didn't really cross the halfway line. So Nick just played kill points, and with that many armored vehicles, there's not a lot I can do with 3 bazookas and 4 HMGs. The observers didn't do a lot in that game, so I've having really enjoyed them at the end of day one and thought they're great, amazing. I've then thrown them back in the bin again at the end of end of round 4 on day 2. Yeah, well
Yeah.
played, Nick. He did exactly what he needed to do. You don't need to throw your infantry away. You can sit, with an HMG range, just plink away. I think I only took four dice or so, maybe, and that was basically just by driving the scout cars up to point blank range in the side and getting all the benefits of being point blank and side shot and so on. Yeah, difficult game for me given my AT or lack of. So
Yeah. Yeah, it was a lot of armor in that one. Even though the armor wasn't good, just the quantity has a quality of
yeah,
its own,
and
doesn't
it was a
it?
high dice count as well. I think he had like 17 dice. So
Yeah.
I've got 19 dice, but I've got 2 jeeps, 3 single officers, and 2 air observers. So that's what 7 dice that aren't doing a huge amount effectively.
Yeah.
Nick had 17 dice, all of which but bar a couple of officers, all of which can do stuff. So
Yeah. Well, I played in the same mission, Jacob Wright, and he had
so another international player. He played a World Open War. So you're up to 4 now. So we're on 4-2 on the Tommies international score. Yeah.
Yep. And he had a British list. He had Brent carriers. He had I think it was the little Vickers with a single light autocannon.
Yeah.
Then he had the Crusader with the double
Double
autocannon.
AA, double AA. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think he had 2 of the double, 1 of the single, I think, if memory serves. And
Yeah.
then he had 2 Brens, 2 trucks, and then his infantry was just like um, SMGs on veterans kind of thing.
Okay.
He had recce transports though, because he'd taken a recce platoon.
Nice.
And so this was one of the ones where one of the few things I was doing, I was defender,
Yeah.
and one of the few things I was doing early doors was trying to mortar his transports for some cheeky order dice.
Yeah.
But basically, what happened was I won the roll off. As I won the roll off, Reese made that call that you can't go off the sides. And I thought, well, that decides it. I'll defend. That's the right decision, I think, for me here.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And because I was already thinking about defending anyway, and I thought he's decided, yeah, that's decided it. Then in the prep, he got 5 out of 10 hits. So I reserved half my
Ouch.
force, my 20 dice.
Yeah.
He got 5 hits out of 10,
Hmm.
only killing like so he killed 4 men basically of 2-man squads
Okay.
because all I deployed was my 4 anti-tank rifles in bushes,
Yeah.
my officers behind them so I could snap them into ambush turn 1, the
Yeah.
mortars, and 1 transport basically is what I ended up having to put on.
Hmm.
He killed the transport. He took out 4 men, one of them being a mortar man, and then turn 1. One of the officers foobarred off the table, so he's already dice up.
Yeah.
The anti-tank rifles in ambush, it was like damned if you do, damned if you don't. If I ambushed, nothing happened. When I went down, he was getting really hot dice with his machine guns and his autocannons. And he ended turn 1, I think, 3 dice up because he'd killed 2 of the anti-tank rifles and an officer.
Okay.
Well, I'd killed the
Well,
officer by running
you'd
away.
killed the officer. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
He only had 1 pin as well. I was livid. So at that point, I thought, Well, now it's your time to run because what I'm
Mm.
playing here is I've reserved all my engineers in transports, and the moment you get within 21 inches of my board edge,
You're going
one
to
of
start
those is going to
flaming.
come whizzing at you and start taking order dice. But he didn't. He kept playing the mission, which, to be fair, was the more fun decision to make. But I thought, you could have just walked. Basically, you could have gone home now and just parked on the back line, and I'm not getting across the table with the autocannons, which is why I didn't want to attack, basically, because there wasn't enough cover for me to advance behind line of sight with these autocannons on the Armor 7 transports. And then he just kept coming at me, and then I just couldn't turn around, basically. The end of one of the turns, everything had gone on his side. I had two dice left, one of them being a transport, one of them being engineers. And his transport was within 21 inches of my table edge. And I thought, this is the moment. Here we go, boys. I'm going to come in, I'm going to knock out the Bren, and then the squadron side will take a couple of hits. The battle begins. And then I failed my test. And then later on, when the battle had commenced, and then I brought in some engineers, flamed something, killed that Bren, and then the next turn he'd whizzed this transport up to push down the flank. He was sort of 18 inches from a flank, but the engineers were right next to it. And I thought, he's gone wrong here because now I can surprise charge this recce transport. Everyone's going to fall out and go down. Oh, he's gone wrong there by going within 6 inches of these engineers who flamed the Bren last turn.
Mhm.
And then because they'd flamed the Bren last turn, they had one pin. And so they foobarred and ran off the table as well.
Brilliant.
So then next dice out the bag's his, so he just drives the truck off the board and collects three order dice basically. And yeah, it was a game like that where in hindsight the only difference I would have made in how I'd played it would have been to have hidden the anti-tank rifles and used them as a hidden threat rather than an ambushing threat. Because I thought I could control his lanes of advance, but he basically just ignored them. And that would have conserved a couple of dice here and there. But other than that, he played exactly what he should have done. I feel like I didn't make horrendous decisions. There's probably a couple of suboptimal ones, like that AT rifles, but it was just one of those games that just completely got away from us, basically.
Yeah, and Jacob's quite an aggressive player, so I'm not surprised that
Yeah.
he just ignored your AT rifles and pushed everything in your face. And credit as well for taking Bren carriers because we're not seeing them a huge amount in V3 at the moment. So that's cool.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I thought the AT rifles would survive longer
Mhm.
because they're veteran, they're in cover, they had at least a 3+ save, depending on which one you're shooting. And he's got like half shot machine guns because it's all transport machine guns. But they died so quickly. I think part of it was that a lot of them were down to half strength anyway. But yeah, that was a hard game. As I say, I'm glad he kept playing and coming at me because
Yeah,
it
yeah,
kept me in the game.
yeah,
But yeah, I knew from basically the end of turn one, I was like, this game's over. Like I can't see a
yeah,
way of me getting back in it.
yeah.
And then, so we move on to happier memories now. Game five. Who did you
Game
play?
five. So this is land grab. I played Tim Greenwood. So a third international of the weekend. He was at WoW this year, or just gone. Tim was playing British. He had a Stewart, vulnerable Daka Stewart. I think he had Recce on it as well. I'm not sure. And three light autocannon Vickers, the ones that you just mentioned that Jacob was using, had a scout car with some guys inside, and then just lots of two artillery observers, and then four or five squads, combination of veterans and inexperienced, and a couple of light mortars. So I played him before. I played him. This was the second time we played at an event, but we've also played outside of events as well. So won that one. We had a great game. Tim's a lovely guy. He's a great guy to play. The air observers did slightly better in this one, although I did manage to shoot down one of my planes, but there we go. So yeah, he had quite a lot of armor. I just basically went on the offensive. He dropped down his artillery barrages early on in turn one. It was like, okay, that's where they are. I was like, well, I'm just going to run. I'm just going to run through them and ignore them. I took out his Stuart by I aggressively pushed up with a scout car at the end of one turn, and then pushed up furthermore, got in the side, point blank. Okay, Stuart's gone. I think one of the Vickers fell to a bazooka team, and I was just able to get enough units, mostly into the neutral zone rather than into his zone. Held the objective, held the secondary. But lovely game. Yeah, always enjoy playing Tim. Tim's. I think this is his first event playing Brits. He only really started playing events last year at the Welsh Nationals, so he's been playing Germany for basically a year, and has now moved over to Brits. So it was good to see him try something different. Yeah, so I finished on 2 wins, a draw, and 2 losses. Solid, literally mid-table finish.
What was your place in 11th then?
I was 12th. Yeah. So
12th. So yeah,
11.5 is the midpoint, isn't it? So
yeah, perfect.
yeah,
And a gentleman's result as well to
yeah.
get.
2-1-2. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yourself, Johnny?
Well, my last game was another one of your opponents that you sent my way, which was Nick. And
So you're
so,
you're on 5 from 5 now in terms of international players. Yeah.
yeah, hard weekend for me. That's
Yeah, I mean that yeah, there were a lot there. Obviously, some of the bigger names weren't there because they'd been at WTC the weekend before. But there's a lot of people with a lot of experience at the hard nose over the last 6-9 months. So yeah, so you're playing Nick, yeah.
yeah. So
So
I'm playing Nick. As you said, he's got 8 armored fighting vehicles and 1 armored transport, and I've got anti-tank rifles and flamethrowers. And so,
flamethrowers, yeah.
but equally, I wasn't particularly intimidated by his vehicles because none of them really packed a big punch. They were all
Mhm.
like they all had the chance to be frustrating by knocking something out against the odds, but
Yes.
they were all. I wasn't as concerned with those particular vehicles, but equally, just the speed in sectors means he
Mm.
does have a bit of an advantage. But equally, I've got my 5 transports, so I did something a little bit rogue in this one where I reserved my engineers in the transports, and then normally you would reserve sort of the Cagapartio because they're outflanked behind. They can't here. And so what I did was I outflanked an anti-tank rifle in a transport with the engineers.
Hmm.
Sorry, I didn't outflank it, I reserved it. So I've reserved my 4 engineers, the 5 transports, an AT rifle. I then set up, I rushed the Caucapartio up one flank with an anti-tank rifle and an officer so I could snap them into ambush at the start of turn 2. Not because I thought they were going to do anything, but just because I thought what it might do is give him pause if he's only going to send a couple of units that way. And sure enough, it worked as cavalry hid behind the house because they knew there were 10 SMG shots coming their way as soon as they went around the corner and sort of waited for the cavalry. His tanks came in, man. His tank rifles were on the opposite side of the market to where his tanks were. And then I think he got a bit of sort of like target fixation where he kept shooting loads of stuff at these anti-tank rifles and pinning them, but they were in hard cover. And this time they survived as long as I was expecting, where on the 2+ save, they just didn't care basically. But it meant that he was standing and shooting rather than moving. And meanwhile, start of or end of turn 2, I raced. I did a full run onto the table sideways, and just basically we just whirlpooled around each other.
Mm.
And then because he'd committed some of his force to doing the whirlpool, but then some of it to defending the whirlpool,
Hmm.
and he'd committed more to defense than I had. I had sort of like the weight of numbers pushing into his quarter. And then actually the anti-tank rifle was pretty tasty on the transport as well because it got it to point blank, which actually got it a kill, which was quite nice. Prep wasn't really up to much. It did immobilize one of his vehicles, which was ideal in a movement mission.
Hmm.
But it did mean that
Yeah.
there was something there that was just going into ambush all game, waiting for something to shoot.
Okay.
Mm.
Yeah, I got away with it. Tim rolled a 1, so he didn't get to bring in prep, and obviously because he was playing Brits, that could have been slightly different for me.
Yeah, that's so frustrating when that happens.
Yeah.
We actually had a little bit of a players' agreement of doing it the way that Russell calls it WoW, where it's one role for both players.
Okay.
Because I don't like I don't like it when I'm the only one prepped, and I don't. It doesn't feel good if they're the only one prepped because then if I win, I'm like, yeah, but I had a big advantage there,
Yeah,
especially if I
yeah.
wrecked something. And so I'd rather, to be honest, I'd rather not do prep at all because it's just a bit of admin, isn't it? And then, like best case scenario, you end up with a wonky battle where one person's down
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
hundred
From,
points
from,
just because I managed
from
to roll a 6 a couple of times.
yeah, before you've even started turn 1. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm not overly keen on the prep to be honest.
yeah. Okay.
Maybe if we play like a D-Day mission and we've got bunkers, but I feel I'm getting off track here. But anyway, I did win that one. I even managed
Yeah.
to sneak the secondary, and it was about 20, somewhere between 23 and 25 points to about 16 to 18 points.
Okay.
So it was a definite victory, but it wasn't like a
It
complete
wasn't a
whitewash.
runaway. No.
Yeah, it wasn't
Okay.
close, but it wasn't far either. So it was a good battle, and actually it was a lot of fun, sort of whirlpooling around each other, and quite a lot of tactical moments where you're like, "Is this the time we trigger the ambush? Is this the way?"
Overall, what did you finish on?
That left me on. Let me think. I think 3 wins, 1 draw, a loss, and only two secondaries. Probably my lowest number of secondaries in a tournament with secondaries
Mhm.
in about 3 years because I just didn't have the manpower, I think, to do both the mission and the secondaries with the positioning. And so yeah, so it put me in pretty good stead. I ended up fifth, which I was a bit surprised with. I was expecting to be further down the table, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
And so
Good
pretty happy
stuff.
with that overall. Pretty
Yeah,
happy.
and yeah, as ever with Firestorm, great venue. Reese and Josh TO'd it as you'd expect from them. So I think the weekend overall, I certainly enjoyed myself.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's always great. Like I don't think I've missed a Welsh tournament in quite some time, like, because of every year I do the Nationals and the Open.
Yep.
That's what I've been doing for
hmm
years. And I don't think I've missed that combo for other than COVID, I guess.
I've done it for 3 years, yeah, which is my sort of time of playing. Well, no, 3 years, 3.5, because I did the Welsh Open before the year before the Nationals. So yeah,
Yeah.
cool.
And so
So
yeah,
we
it's great. As you say, it is a great venue and well run. Right, so having talked about how much we enjoyed Welsh Nationals, as we always do, I think we should probably look at the meta and what people brought, etc., etc. I imagine that's what a lot of our listeners are here for, as much as
Mhm,
they love hearing us tell our war stories.
of course.
So I think we'll start with the nations people brought. So Germany, 5 players brought Germany, 4 players brought Finnish, 4 players brought British, 3 Soviets, 3 Italians, 1 Japanese, 1 American. So the Americans were really undershowing, but no armies of USA for this one.
Yeah, I'm not I'm not sure that if the Arms of USA was included, that you'd get many more. Um,
We'll wait and see, I guess, at the next one.
Yeah, you get
Yeah.
the rocket trucks, so they're pretty cool. You get the armored infantry to take more bazookas. Yeah,
Yeah, I think we'll get a lot of people taking them, even if not for competitive reasons. Like the Warlord GT, I think we're going to see a lot of Americans. Maybe it's
yeah,
not proportionally, but we'll certainly see more than one. Because a lot of people want to run like their paras or their Marines or their Rangers, and so
yeah. And the new airborne kit is really nice as well. Yeah.
yeah, the
So I think
models are great. It's just that book.
okay. So Germany dominated. Not a surprise at the moment. The Finns, this was pre-FAQ, so you're still getting 19-point veteran consomelettes and so on. So yeah, I don't think there's any big surprise there. How many Soviets was it again? Sorry.
So the Soviets, we had a total of 3, so not a huge amount. This was 22 players total as well for anyone who missed that at the beginning.
How many Brits were there? Sorry.
4.
Okay, so I'd have thought there might have been a bigger gap between the number of British and the number of Soviets. I thought there might be more Soviets. Sorry, more British than Soviets. But
Maybe. In terms of where people finished, so just run, I'm just going to do the top 10 basically. I don't
yep.
think there's a lot to gain because 22 players isn't a huge amount and the
Mhm.
variety isn't huge either. But just a sort of a highlights reel, Soviets first, Finnish second, Germany 3, 4, Finland again in fifth, Germany, Japan 6 and 7, and then Brit 8, 9, Soviets in 10th. So the Finns didn't like they half the Finns got in the top 10.
Yeah,
Neither of them won the overall tournament, one in the podium
yeah.
position. So
One in
Gary,
second, Gary. Yeah, well done,
yeah,
Gary.
very well done. And then Rich in third with his Germans that he's played a lot. So
hmm
it's I'm not sure if that says more about Rich or about Germany at the
hmm
minute, but certainly it didn't hurt him anyway. But yeah, I don't think there's a huge amount to be gained from that other than sort of Finns, Germany, Soviets were good. Finns are going to be less good now, and so take them out the mix. I think we're looking at Germany as the key player going forward.
Yeah. We'll jump in on the Soviets. So Chris won. Chris Davies won with 5 victories. Well done, Chris, with a Soviet list. But then the next place Soviet was 10th. So it wasn't like, at the back end of V2, you were seeing Brits and Soviets right at the top. You maybe saw some US in terms of the barbecue build and so on. You certainly weren't seeing Germany, and Finns. Finns were quite popular on a sort of a 1 day, 3 game event, but you didn't necessarily see them all the time at the 2 days. So great that Chris won with Soviets with 5 wins overall, but if you then run down the other Soviet lists, one was in 10th and one was in 16th. So it wasn't like it was
I've run
Yeah,
away.
it wasn't like a
Communist.
runaway. Yeah, 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 absolutely. Yeah. The red wave hasn't happened yet. It might happen after October when the book comes out. Yeah.
Yeah, wait and see, I guess. In terms of order dice, there was no
Hmm.
restriction, and so it's wide open basically. 1100 points though creates its own restrictions.
Yeah.
I actually was the highest order dice at 20 dice. Everyone else had fewer dice than that.
Okay.
The average being about 15.4.
Okay.
And so
Interesting.
everyone's sort of huddling around that. I think if you'd brought 16 dice, you wouldn't have been
Yeah. Yeah.
sad. Fewer than that, like 12, you're in a bit of trouble.
How many did Russell have with his Japanese? Have you got that data to hand?
Russell had 19 dice, and not a single one was a piece of armor as well.
So that's interesting. So you had 20, I had 19, Russell had 19, and the three of us were the only ones that didn't take any tanks. We had no armored platoon.
Yeah, and so I think that's what's pushing the averages down.
Yeah.
Nicely segueing though into our prediction, which was that we last episode we said V3 is becoming a bit of tank wars, basically. And so I was excited to find out, in a sort of a perverse way, if our prediction would be correct that this would just be tank wars, basically. Looking at it, as you said, there were only three people who didn't bring an armored fighting vehicle, and that was me, you, Russ, with his Japanese. Of those three, only one of them didn't bring any armor at all, because obviously you and I had armored transports. And so there was a lot of armor on the table. We
Mhm.
had a total of 66 armored fighting vehicles across the 22 players, so an average of three per player. We actually had 103 total armored vehicles at the tournament, which is an
Interesting.
average of like 4.68
Okay.
vehicles, armored vehicles per player. So every game you're going in expecting to see sort of four or five armored
Yeah, yeah.
vehicles effectively, which meant really if you didn't bring anti-tank,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
unless you faced me, you and Russ,
yeah.
you're going to have a
Yeah.
bad weekend.
Yeah. Or if you were me, you or Russ, it was going to make it slightly harder to deal with those heavier those lists with higher numbers of armor.
Yeah, absolutely. So then if we look at the actual results,
Mhm.
so the first table, if we look at the total number of armored fighting vehicles that people brought and their placings, bringing more didn't actually help you very much. It was kind of there was a slight trend that the bigger lists had more, but because there was a huge spike in the middle,
Mhm.
it doesn't really say much.
Looking at you, Nick Murray. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and so actually there wasn't a huge trend. And actually, if you looked at the quality of armor people brought as well, the
Mm.
average list had an armor value of 7.79. So like eight, let's say. And
And
actually that
is that including transports or
that's the armored
just
fighting
armored
vehicles
fighters? So
alone,
it's
yeah.
just in the armored platoon. Okay.
With if you were to include the transport, it's 7.5, so still quite high. But yeah, it's about eight, so 7.8. But actually, but what was interesting is that's consistent across the entire placings. So
Yeah.
from the bottom list to the top list, the very bottom list actually had slightly more armor. But outside of that, if you exclude the three lists with zero armored fighting vehicles,
Mhm.
everyone had about armor eight.
But the average being 7 point something. So that is suggesting that actually it's there is maybe even more so than in V2. There is the place for that armor 7 tankette or light tank, often with an autocannon or an HMG.
Yeah, well, I
I'm not,
think people are bringing two eights and a seven. But what's interesting is there's no correlation between how much armor you brought. I mean, the thing that skews us a lot is nearly everyone brought armor,
Mhm.
and actually the lists that didn't did better on average. But again, because it's a small field, that could just be like that. That's a big swing in the statistics. Those three lists that had none, because two of them
Yeah,
finished in the top 10.
yeah.
And if you,
Yeah. Two were in the top 10, one was 12. So it is basically the top half of the table, give or
yeah,
take. Yeah.
and so if you throw them in, there is a huge trend that actually not taking armor is better.
Yeah, but that's only three lists out of 22. So yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Now, the fact that like the number of armored fighting vehicles you've taken doesn't really change your outcome, and the quality of them doesn't really change your outcome. The thing that did seem to change your outcome was the number of armored transports you took. So the
Mm,
armored transports actually the players who had more
Yeah.
tended towards the top and like quite significantly as well. So the bottom lists were the ones that had 0 or 1. Like the
Yes.
bottom 5 lists had 0 or 1. And then the top 5 lists all had at least 2 and like maxing out at 5 armored transports.
Yeah.
Now the ones with 5 obviously are the finish lists. And
Yeah.
so you may want to discount them because obviously they're dead now.
So the next
But
one with 4 was me with the 4 scout cars.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so yeah, but so that's a legitimate result,
Yeah.
as it were, because that's still in play.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, the ones with sort of 2 or higher tended to be in the middle or top half of the table.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so actually if you and so basically what you see is if you look at the total number of armored vehicles, more is better, but it's
Mhm.
not the tanks that are making it better, it's the armored transports that are
Yeah.
making it better.
Because they're a reliable delivery system for your infantry, either with SMGs or with flamethrowers, to get where they need to take out units, or to sit on an objective and ride it out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also just to give your opponent something that they're going to struggle to deal with, something that
Yeah.
rifles can't handle.
Mm.
Um, I mean, the other side of the coin, whenever you're looking at this, is it's like cause and effect because correlation's not causation. And so
No.
it could be that the better players prefer armored transports rather than armored transports being good.
Make the players better, or make the results better. Yes. Yeah.
Exactly,
Yeah.
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 And so I wouldn't be, if I'm a new player trying to get into the
Mm.
tournament scene, I wouldn't necessarily be rushing out and buying armored transports. I'd be sticking to my playstyle, practicing it first. But what I wouldn't be doing off the back of the Welsh Nationals is buying loads of tanks because regardless of how many tanks you had, you didn't do hugely better or worse. It was sort of, it was how you used them, I would say, that made the difference.
Yeah, and I've not delved into it in the way you have, but I imagine, let's take the German list, for example. How many of those German armored transports were 254s? If you're not taking a
Yeah.
254, which I really do hope gets sorted out in the FAQ, because in V2 it didn't have a transport capacity. In V3 it does. Where do the men fit? You can barely get 2 machine guns in and a gunner, let alone the ammo, let alone 5 other guys as well. So yeah, if you take that one out, for example, I do wonder if you'll see German lists with as many people leaning into the armored transports, because the 254 is just a bargain for what it does in the moment.
Yeah, that's true, actually. If we take that out as well. So you take out the fins, you take out the 250 slash
And
4,
and
and
and the
then
reason, sorry to jump in, the
Mhm.
reason why we're saying you take out the fins and the 254, well, the fins we know were chronically undercosted at the start of E3. Arguably, they've gone the other way now, and actually they're too expensive. The unreliable discount isn't enough, and the 254 shouldn't, in my view, be appearing as a transport vehicle. It was added in the V2 errata as an armored. Well, it was a tank. It was an anti-aircraft, so it sat in the tank slot in V2. So you take two things out that probably shouldn't be in the game currently, and it may well shift actually what we're seeing in terms of armored transports.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's true because Rich, who came third, Germany 250 slash
254s,
fours,
yep.
Phil Parker, Germany,
254s. Charlie
and then
Murphy,
he's
254s.
in sixth. And so
Yeah.
actually, there's 3 players in the top 10 who account for at least 6 of the armored transports in the top 10. And so perhaps actually, you're right. You just remove once the fins are gone and the 254's gone, then maybe you do stop seeing as many armored transports. I think the point is, though, in conclusion, an average of sort of 4.5 armored vehicles per platoon, sorry, per company, because it's a
Hmm.
company game now.
Hmm.
Um,
It's a company armored game now, not an infantry
yeah,
platoon game.
yeah, it's just like the Welsh Nationals has very much done exactly what we said would happen, which is people are playing tank wars.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And we saw this at roll call. Go and
Mhm.
listen to our roll call analysis. Other than, yeah, Russell's Haxel Ridge list, which you also took to the Welsh Nationals. Everybody had armored transports. Everybody had armored vehicles. Beachhead, very similar. Topher winning it with his Lees and his Kangaroos. Um, we saw the Finns up there with T28s, BA10s, Komsomolets, and so on. Yeah, it is an armored game. It's not an infantry platoon game that we maybe were hoping for or previously played.
Now, the thing is, though, I don't think. it is the meta. Like it is not the most effective strategy. I actually think that what we're seeing is that tanks are good because it
Yes.
forces someone to bring out a tank,
Yeah.
but I actually don't think they are the most effective way to play. It's just that I think a lot of people have heard about the tanks, like they've seen the game going that way and they've jumped on board. Because also, even if you're not trying to play super competitively, tanks are cool, and
Yeah.
so you're always going to have that group of players who are going to bring tanks regardless.
Yeah.
And I think the fact that, in addition to that, the fact that we've made everything else bad, like flamethrowers are
Yes.
bad,
Hands
combat's
of
bad, uh,
Panzerfaust, the more too
Panzerfaust are bad,
expensive.
rifle shooting's bad now because you're
Yeah.
shooting on a worse, you get cover saves. SMGs are bad now because they're so expensive. BARs are bad now. Fire maneuvers bad now. Snipers are bad now. Machine guns are still bad. There isn't anything else in the game that is effective. And so people are thinking, well, I'll take my tanks, a nice defensive strategy. It's hard for you to kill,
Yeah.
and at least I'll knock out your tanks.
Yeah, and they're very forgiving as well because not your regular infantry can't take them out. So you've got to have dedicated heavy weapons in order to be able to take out the tanks. Okay, you've mentioned many times, Johnny, today and also previously that the whole one shot element of a tank is frustrating when you're spending 150 points or whatever on a vehicle. You only get one chance with the pen, it misses. Okay, that's a bit annoying. But actually, if not a lot can take it out in return, unless people are also matching it by buying, tanks with weapons, heavy weapons with penetration values, they're kind of safe
Yeah,
in
especially now they've nerfed spotters because I think the risk was always someone brings an artillery platoon and either pins out your tank with a couple of lucky sixes turn one, or worst case,
saturation bombing because you've got a
yeah,
load of spotters, load of mortars, maybe some multi launchers, and you just ping, 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 ping. If you throw enough at it, someone's going to roll a six or something.
exactly. But now that the spotters are V2 spotters, you
Hmm.
can't do that anymore because you're paying. Let's say I do want to bring five indirect firing weapons. I now need to pay 50 points surcharge, whereas the tanks are paying a 10 points command tax. It's far more efficient to bring the tanks in terms of points. And so if we could go back to old spotters, I think you might start to see a bit of a standoff with the tanks where people are discouraged from taking tanks because of they know that they'll face the artillery. Um, but I don't see that happening in the short term
No.
until we start to get more army books. Maybe we are sort of playing tank wars, but because of the price of, I mean, actually, the question I was going to ask you about was the
Mm-hmm.
bazooka because we said the bazooka's too expensive. I'm still
Yeah.
standing by that.
Yeah.
But did you find the bazooka to be worth every single point of those 60 points you paid for each of them?
No, 100% not. I'm not going to take them veteran. They're far too expensive at that point. So you're taking them as regular. I did take out vehicles with them, and that not just at point blank, but also at 23.5 inches kind of thing. So they're shape charged. They don't lose their penetration value over 12 inches. So that's cool. Um, but it's so easy just to take them out. You just turn a squad at them with an LMG and some rifles, and okay, you've only got to take one guy out, force a morale check, or two guys and they're gone, or you just turn an MG DAC tank and bang, they're gone. Um, Most of my anti-tank capability over the weekend was actually my HMGs. It was the scout cars of HMGs, getting in the side, getting in the rear. I didn't force many order checks that caused people to reverse. I just blew them up when I was able to. So I'm a huge fan of scout cars. I talk about this a lot, and I'm a big fan of HMGs. Um, if we talk about the US for the moment, I guess what my frustration with the US is the majority of their vehicles have Pintle HMGs on it. Also, the US take air observers, and we know that the Brits are not going to get the double shot anymore with the artillery. But the US still get it. So what US are really good at is air observers and HMGs, but their HMGs also scare off their own air observers. And that's really frustrating. I wish there was a mechanic that maybe made it even harder for the US to shoot down their own planes, because if you don't want to buy in a load of tanks as a US player, your bazookas are too expensive. 60 points regular, it is expensive. Maybe 45 points, 50 points, like you said in the last episode, that might be what it is. So you're looking at HMGs. Having airstrikes, air observers is brilliant because it does make your opponent think and so on, but it's too easy to scare off your own planes.
Yeah. Well,
Discuss.
I have a proposal, which is, as we said, you make them 50 points, you make Faust 10 points maximum. You then start to discourage people from taking tanks because there's more anti-tank on the table.
Mhm.
I do think the thing that could have fixed this is if we'd ported more of the V2 rules over. And what I'm specifically thinking of is the bazooka in the squad option. So I'll propose it as a 40 points upgrade.
Yeah.
Your Rangers can have a bazooka embedded in their squad. And so you have to kill 5 veterans to knock that bazooka out.
Yeah, if you look at the armored infantry, and they're the ones in the US book that allow you the access to the extra bazookas because they carried them in the half tracks. They had the extra bazookas, they dismounted, and off they went. Now, I don't know enough about infantry tactics for the US in World War II as to whether or not that bazooka team was effectively an independent team or was within the squad, but the US built, a combat doctrine around bazookas, half tracks, squads, jump out, deal with it. Yeah, having bazookas embedded in squads would certainly make me look at it and go, okay, there's something here that I want to try. Yeah,
Yeah, and you could add a really cool mechanic as well, where a bit like if when you choose, are you embarked on the transport during deployment, you could choose, is your bazooka squad going freelance on their own,
yeah,
or are they going to stick with their squad basically? Because I imagine that's probably the most realistic to the war that you didn't have 2 men just roaming the countryside on their own with a bazooka.
yeah,
They actually were part of a squad, and then every now and then you'd send the bazooka and his loader. I mean, I was going to say on his own, but I imagine he was always within shouting distance of the squad. But let's just say on his own, and so that would be a cool mechanic where you buy the bazooka separate and then you can embed them in a squad if you
mm,
wanted to.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But sadly, we don't have that yet. So it's not going to happen. I don't know. Where do you think we're going then, Phil? Do you think we're going to keep seeing tanks, tanks, tanks? Or do you think people are going to start coming up with new ways to play the game?
I I really hope they do. And we've seen the likes of Ali in Scotland, trying out different ways and high dice count, low dice count, that sort of thing. Russ has said over the weekend, and also I think he said it on one of Bo's videos that he's going to keep going with the Japanese and really push for that. I'm determined to make the US work without defaulting to Chaffies and Stewarts. I love the scout cars. I like the HMGs. There's something there. I don't want to keep shooting down my own planes, so I need to have a think about air observers and that kind of thing. I think for the good of the game, I would like to see there being more builds that can do well towards the end. To be fair, Chris's build was what we might call a bit of a mixed bag. He didn't have a huge number of tanks. He had three armored vehicles and 2 transports, so 5 overall is relatively low from maybe what we've seen in more recent events. But yeah, I would like to see a change with regards to having more options. Because going back to roll call conversation, I said this at the time in the debrief. Of the 10 lists, 9 of them lent very heavily into something. Be that tanks, be that flamethrowers, be that you had who was the guy that you played
And
with the
Mike
fins?
Jones with the fins?
Mike Jones, yeah, with the fins, with the Panzerfaust inside the comms omelettes and so on. So he had the artillery observers with Paul Wickens and Johnny Ferg. So we're seeing people leaning towards extremes. Obviously, the Welsh Nationals, it was very, very tank heavy. Bo's just released today. We're recording this on Tuesday. Bo's just released today a video with Spurley talking about the WTC and what they saw there, and their, I watched it earlier. Their findings were very similar to what we've been talking about. So for the good of the game, I want to see a way of doing well without resorting to 4, 5, 6 armored vehicles.
Yeah, the risk is, I think, it's a bit of a catch-22 where I think you can build a really good list without tanks, but then you face the tanks and you get stomped because the
Hmm.
list that you've built that's good
Hmm.
doesn't have as much anti-tank.
No,
And so it's like a bit of a catch-22 where you build it without the tanks,
yeah,
assuming no tanks, you get stomped. You build it with the tanks, you're just playing tank wars.
yeah,
It's
yeah. If I think about my 5 games, drew against Carrick, beat Jason, and beat Tim. Now Carrick had 4 armored vehicles, 2 transports, 2 Stewarts. Jason had 2 tanks, one one transport, and Tim had one transport and four armored vehicles. So I was comfortable dealing with 4 or 5 armored vehicles. Mike Parker had 2 armor 9s with the Stugs and three of the Vickers, and Nick had 8 armored vehicles and one transport. I just didn't have enough AT. So even though I almost, snuck the win against Mike, as soon as I saw Nick's list on the mission, I was like, this is damage limitation in terms of how many dice I'm going to use. And that's frustrating, because without going off on a tangent, at the end of V2, you sort of saw regular units, you saw Stuarts, you saw Gurkhas, you saw whatever, but there were lots of different lists that were capable of winning consistently. I think at the moment we're just not necessarily seeing that breadth of list that can do well over 5 games. You might do well over 3 games in a one day. You might do what I did and 2 wins and a draw, but that's still 2 losses. It's a gentleman's result, 50%. Like, I wasn't expecting much more, but it's just frustrating to not be able to cope with the huge amount of armored vehicles that we might come across.
Yeah, the problem for me is when you were talking about leaning into a certain build at roll call, a lot of those things are now gone. And so the Finns, no one can lean into a Finnish build anymore. The Brits, couple of months, no one will be able to lean into that anymore. And it's only going to leave the Germans. And the thing actually that's more frustrating again is it's the same vehicles. So everyone will be running the 250/4s. They'll be running the Panzer III with the Dakar. And then it's like sprinkle infantry to taste effectively. And that's going to become, I worry, that specific build is the new Gurkha Stewart build. Um, just
And
because it does feel the most points effective for most players, I think.
yeah, and I was thinking about key positions with 5 objectives. Mike had 4. I think you're right saying Mike had four infantry, just the one platoon. Nick had 4 infantry, just the one platoon. Unless you kind of go right, well, it's 7 objectives to force you to take, over a 5 game weekend, what you pretty much guaranteed you're going to play key positions in one of them. It's going to be 7 objectives, right? I'm not going to get away with 4 5-man squads, or I'm going to chalk that off as a loss. But you're not going to win necessarily. You're not going to necessarily win a 5 game event with 4 wins and a loss.
No, you'll certainly not get first place. Usually, first place is 4 and a draw
4
as
and
a
a draw,
minimum.
or 5. Yeah, exactly.
And so actually, yeah, this was what I was referencing at the beginning, that actually that was my exact thought, that you run 7 because when I played Charlie with his German Panzer Brigade,
Yeah,
basically,
yeah, it's German mechanized platoon. Yeah.
yeah, that was exactly how I got him because I didn't have long range anti-tank. My long range anti-tank was AT rifle, so I was on a 6 best case to glance, and that's if I got to half range basically.
Mm.
And so the game I played was I just sort of allowed him to creep forward and then just got rid of a squad of troops.
Yep.
And now suddenly he couldn't hold all the objectives. Then I got rid of another one. Suddenly he's like, oh, I'm
I've
not
got to
sure I can win,
prioritize.
basically.
Yeah. I've got
Like
to
I've got the
prioritize the
same number of
objectives.
squads as the number of objectives I need to
Hmm.
hold to win. And then by the time I kept whittling, he got himself, and that was why he parked on the central objective to
Mm.
force a draw, basically, because I still had plenty of infantry left, whereas he didn't. And I do think if we'd had 7, I probably could have out put slugged him, basically, where
Hmm.
I kill enough of his squads that he physically can't hold them.
Mm.
I surround the objectives with transport so he can't like drive his tanks onto them. And then I probably could have sneaked an extra objective over him potentially.
Mm.
But
Yeah, I'd say so,
there's not enough.
especially of your list, because you've got the engineers and you've got your. Were you taking just regular guys or
No, no, it was
veterans?
veteran all the way, basically.
Veterans,
The only
yeah.
things that were regular were the mortars and the officers.
Yeah, so you've got what, 2 or 3 veteran squads, Carcapaccio and a couple of veteran squads. You've got 4 engineer squads, and you've got AT rifles. You've got 3-man
Veteran, yeah.
veteran officers. Yeah, you'd easily have been able to have,
Yeah,
anyone
I had
playing
something like 14 units that could hold an
that can
objective,
hold objectives.
and then I
Yeah,
had another 6 that could contest.
yeah,
Actually, no, that's I had 15 that could
15 and
hold,
5,
and then
15 and
5
5.
comsomolets, yeah, and
Yeah.
they can whiz around contesting all day long, or use them as a wall just to slow the opponent down.
So anyway, to circle back to your question, I do really hope that we see people just trying to push it away from the tank heavy meta that we're seeing, try things out. I don't know if currently with the unit options that we've got, with the way the rules are, with the points cost, I don't know how effective that's going to be. But for the good of the game, I would like to see something happen. Either somebody cracks it, or Warlord have a look at it and go, actually, we maybe need to think about, should we have five slots in the tank platoon? Should we be changing things around? But then you're changing stuff in the core book, and we're only what 8-9
Yeah.
months in. Yeah.
And I also don't think that's going to fix it. I think tournament restrictions on lists, I find, tend to be a bit of a faff and don't tend to fix the problem anyway. We always say it pushes people down to the avenue. If I say, oh, it's 3 tanks per platoon, well, I'll just take 2 rifle platoons for cheap as chips, 75 points. So I'll have
Yeah.
150 points in infantry, and then I'll still buy my 6 tanks. And so I actually think what we were hinting at about 7 objectives might be the way to go. Like, we could play kill points where your tanks are worth five
Are
points.
worth more points. Yeah. Priority
Because if
targets, that sort
every
of thing.
armored vehicle,
Mm.
let's say if every armored fighting vehicle, because I don't want to kill half tracks, they're just getting their day in the sun. Um,
Yeah. Leave my scout cars alone, Johnny. Thank
yeah,
you.
every armored fighting vehicle is worth 5 points, and every other unit is worth one.
Yeah.
Suddenly, are we going to see people taking 9 soft tanks?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good shout.
And again, if
Yeah.
they don't count for movement as well, if we say that infantry count as, so let's say sectors, infantry count as 5 points in the enemy zone,
Mm.
tanks count as 2, and armored
Yeah.
transports count as 3, let's say. Again, you're starting to, you're playing in a way where it's sort of pushing people, oh, well, you can take the tanks defensively, but I'm probably just going to draw rather than win most of my games.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Interesting.
So keep your eyes peeled for the English Open pack. You never know what might sneak in there.
Yeah. Yeah, we are working behind the scenes on some ideas about missions and taking, V3 missions, V2 missions as well, to be fair, and just having a look at putting together a suggestion of here's 12 or so 15 missions that you might want to think about that work in a competitive environment.
Exactly. Yeah, very much in the vein of the old Bolt Action Alliance pack where it's here's some missions, here's sort of your standard 8 that are just like the rule book, very balanced, etc. And then here's some more fun ones that should still be balanced, but they're a little bit more quirky, and so you might not want to put them in necessarily because it requires the players to perhaps read them before they get to the table. Otherwise, it's a bit of a head scratcher.
Yeah.
And hopefully that'll
Maybe
help.
maybe we could play 5 games of Grand Tactical at the English Open. We just play Grand Tactical every round and off you go.
Yeah, I think tanks are still an advantage in Grand Tactical, though, wouldn't you
Yeah,
say?
yeah, that's not an idea. It'd be useless.
Um, so eyes peeled on that. But speaking of English Open, we have already sold out the tickets, haven't we? Which is a
We
bit
have.
mad considering what was it, 2 episodes ago that we first started mentioning it.
So I think we officially announced a week Monday ago, so 8 days ago, that they were available, and they sold out this morning. So all 40 have gone. We might be able to add more. It's not our decision. It's in the hands of the organisers. We have asked. We're hoping to push it towards 50, if not 60. But it's very much a case of space and availability and so on. But I just want to say a massive thank you to everybody that's jumped on board so quickly and bought a ticket. We're really chuffed with the response. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you to everyone who is keen to come along again. It's always nice to see you there. And to anyone who missed out, do get in touch because obviously, if we do get another batch of tickets in, we'll reach out to you straight away so you don't miss it the second time round. And worst case, you'll go on the list so that if we do get any dropouts, sort of the almost inevitable but sort of like unfortunate thing that does happen at tournaments, you'll get someone who either like has something they can't move or something comes up, and so it tends to happen. Get yourself on the reserve list, and we'll get you. We'll give you a shout if that does happen. But yeah, huge thank you. I'm really looking forward to it this year. I think
Hmm.
hopefully the dust starts to settle a bit,
Hmm.
um, but I'm not sure it will. To be honest, I think
Well, we've got the armies of GB that's going to be in play. We've said that we're not going to be including the armies of Soviet Union because the armies of Soviet Union is due out right at the end of October, and the English Open is the second weekend in November. It's too close for us to allow people to choose units from the armies of the Soviet Union, for us to check it, go back with any corrections and amendments, and then turn up on the 15th or 16th. So it's going to be, Germany, US, and Great Britain. I think we're going to see more British lists from what we've already been, the little snippets of information that we've been given about the armies of GB. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. We've got some new tables that are being in production, as well as leaning on some of those familiar tables that we have, and also others have helped us out in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we will see a lot of Brits. I'm hoping to see quite a lot of the minors as well that we're not seeing, because with us pushing for a thematic tournament,
Hmm.
like it has to be plausible. And so hopefully we've got a lot of those players who will bring out that army that they've always put on the shelf for the tournament because they're just a little bit uncertain. This might be the one for you to bring it out and just give it a good show on the table.
Yeah, I'd like to see people keep making USA great again, if they ever were great. Well, just great.
As ever, thank you for listening. We are probably going to take a bit of a break now on the podcast. What I mean by that is we're going to move to about a monthly schedule, but realistically, our schedule is going to be dominated by releases. And so, because we don't have a lot going on till the Warlord GT, we might drop one about our mission pack at some point. But other than that, it'll be when FAQs come out, when the armies have come out. And so you can expect sort of like at least one a month from us, but it might be a bit chaotic because it's going to be dependent on when stuff drops, basically.
Cool. Well, as ever, thanks for listening. We haven't said it for a while, so if you're doing the whole YouTube thing, do make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. It really does help us. Our number of subscribers and likes has been going up recently, which is amazing. Do please keep doing that, and follow us as well on Facebook. And if you're interested in making some of these nations great again, or just buying some tanks because tanks are quite good, why not consider using our affiliate link? It will be in the description.
Ta-ta for now.
Ta-ta for now.